The alarm did not sound like a warning. It sounded like the end of something. Mara Vance woke to red light sweeping across the walls of her sleeping pod, and for 3 full seconds she could not remember where she was. Then the cold air of Greywatch Station hit her lungs, and she remembered everything at once. She was on the edge of Sector 9, the last human outpost before the dead zone, and something had just crossed the outer fence line. She pulled on her boots without lacing them, and grabbed the tracker pad from the wall socket. The screen showed a single moving dot, fast, low to the ground, cutting through the drone perimeter like it was not even there. Her hands went still. Only one creature moved like that. The Void Fang had not been seen in 6 months. Command had quietly begun to hope it was dead, gone the way old monsters sometimes go, swallowed by the black rock canyons beyond the fence. Mara had never believed that. She had seen the claw marks on the storage sheds, 3 years old now, still cut deeper into the metal than anything she had ever repaired. Things like that did not simply disappear. She burst into the control room to find Lucy Bennett, already at the main console, her fingers moving fast over the display, sweat catching the light on her forehead. "Tell me it's a glitch," Mara said. "It's not a glitch." Lucy did not look up. Heat signature, moving pattern, size. It's the same one from the mining incident. It's back, Mara, and it's heading straight for the old settlement ruins. The old settlement ruins. Kells Hollow. A place nobody went anymore. Not since the last families had been pulled out after the attacks that gave the Void Fang its name. 3 years of silence had let the wind and the dust reclaim it, house by house, until it was less a town and more a grave, with furniture still inside. "Command's response team won't be ready for another 2 hours, Lucy said. "They're still on the far side of the ridge doing the supply run." Mara was already reaching for her field pack. "Then I'm not waiting 2 hours." "Mara," Lucy finally turned to look at her, and there was real fear in her eyes, the kind that came from knowing someone too well. "That thing has killed 12 people. It doesn't leave anyone behind to talk about it. You go out there alone. You don't come back." "I'm not going to fight it," Mara said, checking the charge on her scanner rather than any weapon. "I want to see it. If it's really back, I want to know why it vanished in the first place, and why it's suddenly moving again. Nobody has ever gotten close enough to learn anything about this creature, except how fast it can kill. I want 5 minutes of distance and a working camera, that's all." Lucy did not look convinced, but she also did not try to stop her again. She knew Mara well enough to understand that once her mind was set, the only thing left to do was make sure someone was watching the door when she came back through it. "Take the short-range radio," Lucy said instead. "Channel 4. I'll keep it open the whole time." Mara nodded, and within minutes, she was moving through the outer gate of Greywatch Station, alone, into a landscape that had swallowed better scouts than her. The land beyond the fence was not the wasteland people imagined when they heard the word dead zone. It was strange and beautiful, in a way that made the danger easy to forget. Black stone canyons carved by old rivers that no longer ran, silver grass that grew nowhere else in the sector, and a sky the color of a bruise just before dawn. Mara had walked this ground more times than any other scout at the station, and she still felt the old thrill in her chest every time she passed beyond the fence line, that mixture of fear and wonder that made her good at her job and terrible at staying safe. She kept her scanner low, watching the dot on the small screen strapped to her wrist. It had stopped moving. That alone was unusual. Every report on the Void Fang described constant motion, a creature that never lingered in one place for more than a few minutes, as if staying still made it vulnerable. Now it had been in the same spot for almost 10 minutes, deep inside the ruins of Kells Hollow. Mara reached the edge of the settlement as the light shifted from red dawn to pale gray morning. The houses here had lost their roofs to time and weather. Doors hung open on broken hinges, swinging slightly in a breeze that smelled of dust and rust. She had been here before, years ago, before the attacks, when children still played in the narrow streets between the mining family homes. Now every window was a black, empty socket, and every sound she made felt too loud. She moved slower here, placing her feet carefully, breathing through her mouth to keep her breath quiet. The dot on her scanner sat 200 meters ahead, past a row of collapsed storage buildings, inside what used to be the old schoolhouse. Mara stopped at the corner of a fallen wall and lifted her scanner higher. The reading was strange. It showed one large heat signature, consistent with the Void Fang's known size and shape, but layered close against it, almost inside the same reading, was a second signature, much smaller, much fainter, the kind of heat pattern that belonged to something small and alive. Her stomach turned. A second creature, perhaps offspring, perhaps the reason the Void Fang had vanished for 6 months was not death at all, but birth, and hiding, and raising something new in the safety of empty ruins. If that was true, then what she was about to do was more dangerous than anything she had done in her career. A mother protecting young was far more unpredictable than any lone predator, and far more willing to kill anything that came close. She should have turned back then. She knew that even as she kept walking forward, drawn by the same curiosity that had gotten her into more trouble than she liked to admit. She told herself she would look once, from a safe distance, and then retreat, and radio in the coordinates for the response team. She reached the broken doorway of the old schoolhouse, and pressed herself against the crumbling wall beside it. Her hands were shaking now, not from cold, but from the pure animal knowledge that something enormous and dangerous was only a few steps away. She raised her camera, set it to record, and leaned just far enough to see through the gap where a window used to be. What she saw made her forget, for a moment, to breathe at all. The Void Fang was larger than any description had prepared her for, its long body coiled in the corner of the ruined room, where morning light fell through a broken ceiling beam. Its scales caught that light and turned it dark silver, almost blue, and even in stillness there was a kind of terrible grace to the shape of it. Powerful shoulders, long clawed limbs folded beneath its body, a head crowned with ridges that looked sharp enough to cut stone. But it was not the size of the creature that stopped Mara's breath. It was what the creature was doing. Curled tightly against its chest, tucked beneath the shelter of one folded limb, was not an offspring at all. It was a human infant, tiny and still, wrapped in a torn scrap of fabric that must once have been a blanket. The child's small chest rose and fell in slow, steady breaths. Alive. Somehow. Impossibly. Alive. The Void Fang's head lifted slightly, and Mara's whole body went cold, certain she had been discovered. But the creature was not looking toward the doorway. It was looking down at the child, its posture unlike anything described in any report Mara had ever read about this animal. There was no hunger in it, no violence waiting to happen. There was only a strange, careful watchfulness, the kind of stillness that came from guarding something precious rather than hunting something weak. Mara stayed frozen in the doorway for a long moment, her camera recording, her mind refusing to accept what her eyes were showing her. The deadliest creature in Sector 9, the beast responsible for a death toll no one liked to say out loud, was lying in the ruins of a dead town with a human child curled against its chest, like something it intended to protect rather than harm. A twig snapped somewhere behind her, and every instinct in her body screamed to run. But the sound had come from her own boot shifting on broken stone, and by the time she registered that, the Void Fang's head had already turned toward the doorway, toward her, its eyes catching the pale morning light. For 3 long seconds, neither of them moved. Mara stood frozen, camera still raised, staring into eyes that held none of the mindless rage she had expected. There was something else there instead, something closer to caution, closer to the wary calculation of a creature deciding whether a stranger was a threat worth fighting, or a problem worth avoiding. Then, without warning, the Void Fang rose in one smooth motion, gathering the child carefully against its body, and moved through a gap in the far wall, gone into the ruins before Mara could take a single step forward. She stood alone in the broken schoolhouse for a long time after that, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her ears, the recording still running in her shaking hands. She had gone looking for a monster, and found something she had no name for, something that broke every rule she thought she understood about the deadliest creature in the sector. Her radio crackled to life against her hip. Lucy's voice, tight with worry. "Mara, talk to me. What's happening out there?" Mara lifted the radio slowly, her eyes still fixed on the gap in the wall where the creature had disappeared, carrying its small, impossible passenger into the shadows of the ruined town. "Lucy," she said quietly, "you are not going to believe what I just saw." And somewhere beyond the broken walls of Kell's Hollow, the Void Fang moved deeper into the ruins, the small human heartbeat still steady against its chest, carrying a secret that was about to change everything Sector 9 believed it knew. Mara lowered the radio without waiting for Lucy's answer, because she already understood that no words would make this easier to explain from a distance. Some things had to be seen to be believed, and she had just become the only living person who had seen this, and lived to describe it. She turned back toward the gap in the wall, torn between the training that told her to retreat immediately and report, and the growing certainty that if she left now, she might never find this place again, and never learn the truth of what she had just witnessed. She chose to stay, just a little longer, just long enough to understand. Lucy's voice came through the radio again, sharper this time, edged with the kind of fear that came from being helpless on the other end of a signal. "Mara, say something." "What did you see out there?" Mara pressed the radio to her mouth, still staring at the gap in the broken wall. "There's a child, Lucy. A human infant. Alive. The Void Fang was carrying it, protecting it, not hunting it. I need you to trust me on this, because I know exactly how it sounds." Silence stretched across the channel for a moment before Lucy answered, her voice careful now, the way people speak when they think someone might be losing their grip. "Mara, you've been out there alone for almost an hour. The mind plays tricks in the ruins. Everyone knows that. Come back to the station and we'll look at the footage together. I have it recorded," Mara said. "This isn't exhaustion. This is real. And if I leave now, I might lose the trail completely. The response team will be at the gate in 90 minutes, Lucy said. "The command already logged the alert. If you're still out there when they arrive, they will not ask questions before they act. You know how this works. A confirmed Void Fang sighting means a kill order. Automatic, no debate." Mara closed her eyes. She did know how it worked. She had helped write parts of the protocol herself, back when the deaths in Kell's Hollow were still fresh enough to make everyone on the station flinch at loud noises. A kill order meant a squad with heavy weapons and zero patience for anything that looked like the creature responsible for so much loss. If they found the Void Fang now, with a child in its care or not, they would not hesitate. "Then I need to document everything I can before they get here," Mara said. "If there's any chance this changes what people believe about that creature, I need proof strong enough that nobody can argue with it." She could hear Lucy exhale slowly through the radio, the sound of someone choosing between two bad options. 90 minutes, Mara. That's all you have. After that, I can't protect you from the decisions other people make." "Understood," Mara said, and clipped the radio back to her belt. She moved through the gap in the schoolhouse wall, into what had once been a narrow street between houses, now choked with fallen stone and creeping silver grass that had pushed up through cracks in the old pavement. The trail the Void Fang left behind was easy enough to follow if she knew what to look for. Faint drag marks in the dust, the occasional broken branch of dead brush, a set of prints far larger than any human boot could make. She followed them past 3 collapsed homes and into what had once been the town's central well, now dry and half-filled with debris. The tracks led around the edge of it, toward a structure that had survived the years better than most, a low storage building built from thick stone rather than the cheaper materials used for family homes. Its door was gone, but the walls stood solid, and the roof, though cracked, had not fully caved. Mara approached slowly, scanner raised, watching the heat signature grow stronger with every step. She stopped 10 meters from the entrance and crouched behind a fallen support beam, giving herself both cover and a clear line of sight. Inside, in a pool of pale light from a gap in the roof, the Void Fang lay curled in much the same position as before, the small human child still tucked against its body. But now, Mara could see more clearly what she had only glimpsed in the schoolhouse. The creature's side bore old scars, long-healed but visible even through its dark scales, the kind of marks left by mining equipment rather than natural causes. Its right foreleg carried a faint limp when it shifted its weight, an old injury that had never quite mended correctly. This was not the flawless killing machine that station reports described. This was a creature that had been hurt, badly, at some point in its life, and had survived it. Mara found herself wondering, not for the first time since entering the ruins, whether the story everyone believed about the Void Fang was as simple as it had always seemed. She lifted her camera and recorded in silence, careful not to make a single unnecessary sound. The child stirred slightly in its sleep, one small hand curling against the dark scales beneath it, and the Voidfang's head lowered immediately, nostrils flaring, as it checked on the source of the movement. There was nothing predatory in the motion. It was the same instinctive check any parent might make, human or otherwise, the automatic reassurance that the small, vulnerable thing in their care was still safe. Mara's chest ached with an emotion she had not expected to feel out here, something between wonder and grief. Whatever had happened to bring a human infant into the care of the most feared creature in the sector, it had clearly been happening for some time. The child looked healthy, well-fed, calm in a way that suggested it had known no other kind of care since whatever tragedy first separated it from its own kind. She thought of the mining families who had lived in this settlement before the attacks, the ones who had vanished from the official records along with their homes. Perhaps this child was one of theirs, left behind in the chaos of that terrible night, somehow surviving where grown adults had not. The thought sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the cold morning air. A sudden sound broke the stillness, sharp and mechanical, carried faintly on the wind from somewhere beyond the ruins. Mara's blood ran cold. It was the unmistakable whine of transport engines, still distant, but closing fast. The response team was arriving far earlier than Lucy had promised. The Voidfang's head snapped up instantly, ears or the ridged structures that served as such flattening against its skull, every muscle in its body tensing. It rose in one fluid motion, gathering the child close, and Mara watched with rising panic as the creature moved toward the far side of the storage building, clearly intending to flee deeper into the ruins before the transports arrived. Mara made a decision in that moment that she would spend the rest of her life trying to explain to people who had not been there to understand it. She stepped out from behind the fallen beam, into full view of the creature, both hands raised, empty, no weapon in sight. The Voidfang froze instantly, head swinging toward her, a low sound building in its chest that vibrated through the stone floor beneath Mara's boots. It was not quite a growl, not quite a warning, something in between. The sound of a creature calculating whether the figure in front of it represented a threat to the small life it carried. "I'm not here to hurt you," Mara said quietly, keeping her voice as level as she could manage, despite the pounding of her own heart. "And I'm not here to take the child. But there are people coming, and they will not understand what I'm seeing right now. You need to move, and you need to move quickly, away from the open ground." She had no way of knowing whether the creature understood a single word she said, but something in her tone, or perhaps in the stillness of her posture, seemed to register. The low sound in its chest faded slightly, though the wariness in its eyes did not disappear. The engine whine grew louder. Mara risked a glance toward the horizon and saw the first transport crest the distant ridge, moving fast toward the settlement. She had perhaps 3 or 4 minutes before it reached the outer edge of Kell's Hollow. "This way," she said, gesturing toward a narrow gap between 2 collapsed buildings, a path she remembered from her earlier explorations of the ruins, one that led into a shallow canyon too tight for the transports to follow. "There's shelter, if you're willing to trust me for the next few minutes." The Voidfang did not move at first, its eyes shifting between Mara and the approaching sound of engines, weighing a decision that would determine everything that followed. Mara held her ground, her raised hands beginning to ache from the strain, refusing to lower them, refusing to give the creature any reason to see her as a threat. Then, slowly, the Voidfang began to move, not toward her, but past her, toward the gap between the buildings she had indicated. It paused just before entering the narrow passage, turning its head back toward her one final time, and in that look, Mara saw something she would carry with her for the rest of her life. A flicker of something close to recognition, close to gratitude, in the eyes of a creature everyone believed incapable of either. Then it was gone, vanishing into the shallow canyon with the child still held safe against its chest. Mara lowered her hands and turned to face the approaching transports, her mind racing to construct an explanation that would buy the creature enough time to disappear completely. The first vehicle roared through the outer edge of the ruins moments later, kicking up a cloud of pale dust, and came to a hard stop only a few meters from where she stood. The side door slammed open, and Owen Drake stepped down, the commander of the response team, his expression already hard with the particular kind of anger reserved for scouts who ignored protocol. Behind him, 4 armed soldiers fanned out, scanning the ruins with the kind of practiced efficiency that came from having done this exact drill too many times before. "Vance," Drake said, his voice carrying the flat authority of a man used to being obeyed instantly. "You want to explain why you're standing in the middle of an active threat zone alone, with no backup, no clearance, and apparently no intention of following a single protocol we have in place?" Mara straightened her spine and met his eyes without flinching. "I found something out here, Commander. Something that changes everything we think we know about the Void Fang. And before your team does anything else, I need you to hear me out." Drake's jaw tightened, his gaze sweeping past her toward the empty ruins, the storage building, the narrow gap between the collapsed structures where the creature had vanished only minutes before. For a long, tense moment, he said nothing at all, and Mara held her breath, praying that whatever instinct had guided her decision to trust a monster with a child's life had been the right one. "You have 5 minutes," Drake said finally, his voice cold. "Make them count." And somewhere in the shallow canyon beyond the ruins, hidden from sight, the Void Fang pressed itself against the stone wall, the small human heartbeat still steady against its chest, listening to the voices of the people who had come to hunt it, waiting to see whether the strange, unarmed woman who had shown it mercy would be able to keep her word. Mara had exactly 5 minutes to convince a man trained to see every threat as something to be eliminated, that the deadliest creature in the sector deserved a chance to prove itself otherwise. She had spent years learning how to read terrain, how to track movement across broken ground, how to survive in places that offered no forgiveness for mistakes. She had never once trained for a conversation like this. 3 years ago, the Void Fang killed 12 people in this settlement, Drake said, arms crossed, eyes hard as the stone ruins around them. 12. I read every one of those files before I took this post. I know what that creature is capable of. What I don't understand is why a scout with your record is standing here defending it, instead of reporting a confirmed sighting like she's supposed to. Because I saw something that doesn't match the file, Mara said. She held up her camera, hands steady now despite the pounding in her chest. There's a child, Commander. A human infant, alive, being cared for by that creature. I have it recorded. I watched it protect that baby, the same way any parent would protect their own. Drake's expression did not soften, but something behind his eyes flickered, a crack in the certainty he had walked in with. "Show me." Mara held out the camera, and Drake took it with obvious reluctance. His soldiers still fanned out around the ruins, weapons raised, eyes scanning every shadow and broken doorway for signs of movement. He watched the footage in silence, his jaw working slightly, as the recording played through the schoolhouse scene, then the storage building, the child's small hand curling against dark scales. When it ended, he handed the camera back without a word, staring out at the empty ruins for a long moment before speaking again. "This doesn't change the mission, Vance. That creature is still responsible for 12 deaths. A child in its care doesn't erase that history. If anything, it makes the situation more dangerous. We don't know how it will react if it feels cornered, and we don't know what condition that infant is in. This needs a controlled extraction, not a rescue mission led by a scout acting alone." "I'm not asking you to ignore what happened 3 years ago," Mara said. "I'm asking you to consider that maybe we don't actually know the full story of what happened 3 years ago. Look at its injuries, Commander. Old wounds, healed wrong, the kind that come from mining machinery, not from anything a scout would carry. What if the attack started because we were the ones who moved into its territory first? What if something provoked it, and everything since has been about survival, rather than violence for its own sake?" Drake was quiet for a long moment, and around them his soldiers shifted uneasily, clearly listening despite maintaining their positions. "That's a theory, Vance, not evidence." "Then let me get you evidence," Mara said. "Give me time. Let me approach it the way I did today, without weapons, without threat. If I can build enough trust to get close, we can document its behavior properly, figure out what actually happened, and make a decision based on facts, instead of 3-year-old panic." "And if it decides today is the day it stops being patient with you?" Drake asked. "I'm not willing to lose another scout to that creature, Vance. I've read the reports of what it did to the last people who got close." "Then send someone with me," Mara said. "Not a strike team. One person, for observation only, someone to confirm what I'm seeing so it isn't just my word. Give me 48 hours before you make any decision about elimination. If I'm wrong, If it turns out to be exactly the threat the old reports describe, I'll stand down and support whatever action your team decides to take." Drake studied her for a long time, the wind pulling at the dust around their boots, the silence of the ruins pressing in from every direction. Finally, he turned to one of his soldiers, a woman with sharp eyes and steady hands, who had said nothing throughout the entire exchange. "Cole," Drake said, "you're with Vance for the next 48 hours. Full observation protocol. No engagement unless there's a direct threat to either of you. I want hourly reports, and I want video evidence of everything you see. If this creature so much as raises a claw toward either of you, the mission ends immediately, and we proceed with elimination. Are we clear?" The soldier, Ethan Cole, nodded once, adjusting the strap of his equipment pack with the calm efficiency of someone used to following difficult orders without complaint. "Clear, Commander," he said. Drake turned back to Mara, his expression still hard, still unconvinced, but no longer entirely closed. 48 hours, Vance. That's everything I can give you. After that, if the situation isn't resolved, I bring in a full team, and we do this the way protocol demands. Do you understand what I'm risking by giving you this window?" "I understand," Mara said. "Thank you." Drake did not respond to that. He simply turned and began issuing orders to the rest of his team, pulling them back from the ruins, establishing a perimeter at a safe distance, rather than pushing further in. Mara watched him go, her legs suddenly weak with the release of tension she had been holding since the moment the transports first appeared on the horizon. Ethan Cole approached her a moment later, his expression far gentler than his commander's had been. "You really believe this, don't you? That there's more to that creature than what the old reports say?" "I know what I saw," Mara said, "and I know I've never seen a predator behave the way that one did today. It had every opportunity to hurt me, and it chose to trust a stranger instead, because it understood that trusting me gave that child a better chance at survival. That's not the behavior of something driven purely by violence." Ethan nodded slowly, glancing toward the narrow canyon where the creature had disappeared. "Then let's go find out if you're right." They moved together into the ruins, Mara leading the way with the confidence of someone who had walked this ground alone, only hours before. Ethan following close behind with his equipment pack and a small portable scanner of his own. The transports pulled back to a distant perimeter, engines idling, watching from a distance that gave Mara room to work, without the constant threat of sudden violence hanging over every step. They found the entrance to the shallow canyon exactly where Mara had left it, and she paused at the opening, lowering her voice to barely above a whisper. "From here, we move slowly. No sudden noises, no fast movements. If we see it, we stop. We let it decide how close it wants us to come. This has to happen on its terms, not ours." Ethan nodded, adjusting his scanner to a passive setting that would register heat signatures without emitting any active pulse that might alarm the creature. They moved into the canyon together, the walls rising steep and close on either side, the light growing dimmer as they went deeper into the shadowed passage. It took nearly 20 minutes of careful searching before they found it, tucked into a hollow beneath an overhang of stone. The void fang curled protectively around the sleeping child, its eyes open and alert, watching their approach with the same wary calculation Mara had seen before. "Stay here," Mara whispered to Ethan, and stepped forward alone, slowly, her hands visible and empty at her sides. The creature's low warning sound built in its chest as she approached, but it did not retreat further into the hollow, and it did not move to attack. Mara stopped several meters away, close enough to see the details of its scarred hide clearly, far enough to give it space to feel safe. "I kept them away," she said softly, "like I promised. This is Ethan. He's here to help me understand, not to hurt either of you." The Void Fang's eyes shifted to Ethan, still crouched at the mouth of the hollow, and the low sound in its chest gradually faded into something quieter, something closer to watchful stillness than active threat. Ethan raised his scanner slowly, careful to keep his movements small and unhurried, and began recording the readings that would form the foundation of everything Mara hoped to prove over the following 2 days. Hours passed in careful, patient observation. Mara and Ethan took turns watching from a respectful distance, documenting every detail they could without disturbing the fragile trust that had begun to form. They watched the Void Fang leave briefly to hunt, always returning within minutes, always checking on the child immediately upon its return. They watched it drink from a hidden spring deep within the canyon, watched it rest with one eye seemingly always open, alert even in sleep. By the second day, something remarkable began to happen. The creature no longer retreated when Mara approached to leave small offerings of food near the edge of the hollow, dried meat from the station's supplies, carefully chosen to avoid anything that might cause harm. It watched her with steady, considering eyes, and slowly, cautiously, it began to accept what she offered, the distance between them shrinking with each careful interaction. "I've never seen anything like this," Ethan said quietly on the evening of the second day, as they sat together at a safe distance, reviewing hours of recorded footage on his portable screen. "The behavioral patterns don't match anything in the threat assessment files. This isn't a predator hunting out of pure instinct. There's decision-making here, judgment, something that looks a lot like reasoning." Mara nodded, exhaustion pulling at her limbs after 2 days of careful, patient work. But her mind remained sharp with the growing certainty that she had stumbled onto something far larger than a single strange encounter. "We need to find out what happened 3 years ago. If we can prove the attacks were provoked, if we can show this creature was defending territory, rather than simply killing for the sake of it, maybe we can change how Command sees it before Drake's deadline runs out." Ethan glanced at the timer on his equipment, the digital numbers counting down the remaining hours of their 48-hour window. "We don't have much time left, Mara. 12 hours, maybe less. And even if we find the answers you're looking for, I'm not sure Drake will be willing to change his orders. He's under pressure from Command to resolve this quickly, one way or another." Mara looked back toward the hollow where the Void Fang lay curled around the sleeping child, its scarred hide rising and falling with slow, steady breaths, its eyes half closed but never fully asleep. Somewhere out there, 12 hours away, a decision was waiting to be made that would determine whether this fragile, impossible trust would be given the chance to survive, or whether it would end the way so many stories about this creature had ended before, in violence born from fear rather than understanding. "Then we'd better find those answers fast," she said, and rose to her feet, already turning toward the deeper ruins of Kel's Hollow, toward the old mining records that might hold the truth about what really happened 3 years ago, before the Void Fang became a name that struck fear into every heart in Sector 9. The old mining administration building stood at the far edge of Kel's Hollow, its walls more intact than most of the settlement, protected over the years by thick reinforced construction, meant to withstand the pressures of deep excavation equipment. Mara and Ethan reached it as the last light of day faded into the deep violet dusk that marked the beginning of night across the sector. "Records room should be on the lower level," Mara said, pushing through a door that groaned in protest after years without use. Mining operations always kept detailed logs. If something happened out here that triggered the first attacks, there should be documentation somewhere in this building. They moved through corridors thick with dust, past offices stripped bare by years of scavenging and decay, until they found a stairwell leading down into the lower levels where the settlement's power core had once been housed. Ethan's portable light cut through the darkness, revealing rows of storage cabinets, most rusted shut, a few standing open with their contents long since destroyed by moisture and time. It was Ethan who found the surviving data terminal, tucked into a corner office that had somehow avoided the worst of the damage. He worked quickly, connecting his equipment to draw whatever power remained in the old system, and after several tense minutes, the ancient screen flickered weakly to life. "There's something here," he said, scrolling through fragmented files. "Operational logs, dated just before the first attack. Mara, you need to see this." She leaned over his shoulder, reading the faded text as it scrolled across the damaged screen. The logs described an expansion of mining operations into a canyon system beyond the settlement's original boundary, an area the surveys had flagged as biologically significant, but ultimately cleared for excavation, due to pressure from the company's production targets. The final entry, dated only 2 days before the first reported attack, mentioned the discovery of what the surveyors called a den site, evidence of a large creature nesting deep within the canyon, along with what appeared to be the remains of offspring. Mara's breath caught in her throat. They found a nest, and they kept digging anyway. "The log says the site was cleared using standard excavation charges," Ethan read, his voice quiet with growing understanding. "They didn't relocate it, Mara. They didn't even try to avoid it. They just kept working, and whatever was living in that den paid the price. The pieces began to fall into place with a clarity that made Mara's stomach twist. The Void Fang had not simply appeared 3 years ago to terrorize the settlement out of nowhere. It had been provoked, its home destroyed, its young almost certainly killed in an excavation that showed no regard for what already lived on that land. The attacks that followed had not been random violence. They had been the response of a creature pushed past every limit of tolerance, defending territory that had already costed everything it once protected. "This changes everything," Mara said. "Drake needs to see this. Command needs to see this. The story everyone believes about the Void Fang isn't the full truth. It's not even close." Ethan was already copying the files onto his equipment, his hands moving fast with the urgency of someone who understood exactly how much this discovery mattered. "We need to get this back to the station immediately. If this reaches command before Drake's deadline, it could change everything about how they handle this situation." They moved quickly back through the administration building, emerging into full darkness now, the settlement ruins lit only by the pale glow of distant stars and the faint work lights from the response team's perimeter camp. Mara's mind raced as they walked, already composing the report she would need to deliver, already imagining the argument she would need to make to convince Drake that everything he thought he knew about this mission needed to change. They were halfway back toward the canyon where the Void Fang waited, when a sudden burst of radio static cut through the night air, followed by Lucy's voice, tight with urgency. "Mara! Ethan! Come in! You need to hear this now." Mara grabbed her radio, heart pounding. "Go ahead, Lucy." "Command just overrode Drake's 48-hour window," Lucy said, her voice tense and fast. "They're citing insurance liability, saying the risk of allowing the creature to remain active near the settlement is too high, regardless of what you've found. There's a new strike team inbound, full elimination protocol, no observation period. They'll reach the ruins within the hour." Mara's blood went cold. "That can't be right. Drake gave us until morning. We found evidence, Lucy. Real evidence that changes the entire situation. The attacks were provoked. The mining company destroyed a den site 3 years ago. This creature has been defending territory that was taken from it by force." "I believe you," Lucy said, "but Command isn't interested in the history right now. They want the threat neutralized before something goes wrong that they'll have to answer for. Mara, you need to get out of there before the new team arrives. This isn't Drake's call anymore. This is coming from much higher up." Mara looked at Ethan, whose expression had gone as pale and grim as her own. "How much time do we actually have?" "Maybe 40 minutes, Lucy said. "I'll try to reach Drake directly, see if there's anything he can do to slow this down. But Mara, I need you to understand that this might not be something either of us can stop." The radio fell silent, and Mara stood frozen for a moment, in the darkness of the ruined settlement, the weight of what was coming pressing down on her chest like a physical thing. 40 minutes. That was all the time left to somehow save a creature that had spent the last 3 years being hunted for a tragedy it never chose to cause. "We have to warn it," she said, already moving toward the canyon at a run. "We have to get it moving, away from here, somewhere the strike team won't find it before we can present this evidence properly." Ethan matched her pace, equipment bouncing against his back as they sprinted through the darkened streets of Kells Hollow, past the collapsed homes and empty doorways, toward the narrow passage that led into the shallow canyon where the Void Fang waited with its small, sleeping charge. They reached the hollow beneath the stone overhang just as the first distant hum of approaching transport engines began to carry across the night air, faint but unmistakable, growing louder with every passing second. The Void Fang's head snapped up immediately, ears flattening, every muscle tensing at the sound that had come to mean danger. "You need to move," Mara said, breathless from the run, dropping to a crouch, a safe distance from the creature. "There's a new team coming, and they're not giving you the chance we tried to give you. You have to get further into the canyon, deeper than they'll be willing to follow tonight." The Void Fang rose immediately, gathering the child close, its eyes locked on Mara with an intensity that seemed to carry real understanding of the urgency in her voice. But instead of fleeing deeper into the canyon as Mara expected, it took a hesitant step toward her instead, then another, closing the distance between them in a way it had never done before. "Mara," Ethan said quietly, a warning edge in his voice, "what is it doing?" Mara held perfectly still, watching as the massive creature approached, until it stood only a few meters away, close enough now that she could see every detail of its scarred hide, every old wound left by machinery that had destroyed everything it once loved. It lowered its head slightly, an unmistakable gesture of trust, and for a moment, the fear that had colored every encounter Mara had ever heard described about this creature simply fell away, replaced by something far more complicated and far more human than anyone had ever believed possible. The engine hum grew louder, closer now, and Mara knew their time had run out.
Go!
She said urgently, gesturing deeper into the canyon. Please, trust me one more time. The Voidfang held her gaze for one final, lingering moment, then turned and moved swiftly into the deeper shadows of the canyon, the child still held safe against its chest, vanishing from sight, just as the first beams of transport headlights swept across the mouth of the passage. Mara and Ethan turned to face the approaching lights together, standing between the strike team and the narrow entrance to the canyon, prepared to make one final argument for a creature that had already given them every reason to believe it deserved the chance to be understood rather than destroyed. The lead transport rolled to a stop only meters away, and this time it was not Owen Drake who emerged from the vehicle, but a stranger in a command uniform Mara did not recognize, flanked by soldiers whose weapons were already raised and ready, their orders clearly different from anything Drake had authorized only 2 days before. Step aside, the stranger said, his voice cold and final, carrying the absolute authority of someone who had already made every decision he intended to make tonight. This creature has cost this sector enough lives. Tonight, that ends. Mara stood her ground, evidence files clutched tightly in her hand, and prepared to fight for the truth, with the only weapon she had left, the desperate hope that words might still be powerful enough to stop what was coming. My name is Mara Vance, she said, forcing her voice to stay level, despite the fear pounding through her chest. I'm a station scout, and I have evidence that changes everything you think you know about tonight's mission. Before you give a single order, I need 30 seconds of your time. The stranger, whose uniform identified him as Director Owen Bracken, Regional Oversight for Sector 9's defense operations, folded his arms with visible impatience. You have 15, and you're already standing in violation of a direct elimination order, so I'd choose my words carefully. Ethan stepped forward beside her, holding up his equipment with the recovered mining logs already displayed on the screen. This is footage from the settlement's original mining records, recovered less than 2 hours ago. It documents the discovery of a den site in the canyon system beyond the original boundary, along with evidence of offspring at that site. The excavation continued anyway, using standard charges, only 2 days before the first reported attack. Bracken's expression did not change immediately, but Mara saw the flicker of something behind his eyes, the same crack in certainty she had seen in Drake 2 days before. You're suggesting the creature's aggression was retaliatory. I'm not suggesting it, Mara said. I'm telling you it's documented fact. This creature lost everything to careless expansion 3 years ago, and every attack since has been the response of something defending the only territory it had left. Tonight, that same creature has been caring for an abandoned human infant, with more patience and gentleness than I've seen from some people in this sector. It has had every opportunity over the last 2 days to harm me, and instead, it chose to trust me. That is not the behavior of a mindless killer, Director. That is the behavior of something capable of far more than we've ever given it credit for. Bracken's jaw tightened, his gaze moving past Mara toward the dark mouth of the canyon, where somewhere beyond sight, the Voidfang waited with its small charge, listening to voices that would decide whether it lived to see another sunrise. Even if everything you say is true, Vance, that doesn't erase 12 deaths. Sympathy for a difficult history doesn't undo the danger this creature still represents to this settlement and this sector. Then let us prove it doesn't have to be a danger, Mara said, desperation creeping into her voice now as the seconds ticked away. Give us the chance to relocate it, to establish a boundary it can live within safely, away from any future expansion. Let us build something better than another line in a file about how many people this sector has lost to fear instead of understanding. If I'm wrong, if this creature shows even the smallest sign of continued aggression toward people, I will stand aside and support whatever action you decide is necessary. But give us that chance first. The night air hung heavy with silence, as Bracken considered her words, the soldiers behind him shifting uneasily, their weapons still raised but their eyes flicking uncertainly toward their commanding officer, waiting for a decision that would determine everything that happened next. Then, from deep within the canyon, a sound broke the silence, low and unmistakable, the same warning growl Mara had heard on her very first encounter in the ruined schoolhouse. But this time, it was not directed at her. It carried past her, toward the strike team, a clear signal that whatever patience the creature had shown toward Mara did not extend automatically to armed strangers standing at the edge of its refuge. "Careful," Ethan murmured, glancing nervously toward the darkness. "It's protecting the entrance. If your team pushes forward now, this ends badly for everyone, including the child." Bracken's eyes narrowed, weighing the tactical reality of the situation against the political risk of a mission gone wrong in front of witnesses who would report every detail back to command. Finally, after a long, tense moment, he raised a hand, signaling his soldiers to lower their weapons. 72 hours, he said, his voice tight with reluctant concession. "You will coordinate a full relocation plan, with proper containment measures, moving that creature to a designated zone far beyond any current or planned excavation boundary. If it shows any sign of aggression toward my personnel during that window, the original order stands, and there will be no further negotiation. Do you understand the terms, Vance?" Relief flooded through Mara so suddenly that her knees nearly buckled beneath her. "I understand, Director." "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Bracken said, already turning back toward his transport. "Thank the evidence your engineer found tonight. If those logs hadn't existed, this conversation would have ended very differently." He paused, glancing back toward the canyon one final time. "Get it done properly, Vance. I won't be giving this kind of window again." The strike team withdrew slowly, transports rolling back toward the perimeter camp, engines fading into the distance until the ruins of Kell's Hollow returned to their familiar, haunted silence. Mara sank down onto a fallen block of stone, the adrenaline of the last hour draining out of her all at once, leaving her hands shaking and her breath ragged with released tension. Ethan sat down beside her, exhaling slowly. "That was closer than I ever want to experience again." "Agreed," Mara said, managing a weak, exhausted laugh despite everything. "But we did it. We actually did it." Over the following 3 days, Mara led a careful, patient process of building the trust necessary to safely relocate the Voidfang and its small charge to a protected zone deep within the sector, far from any settlement or planned excavation. It was slow work, requiring more patience than she had ever needed for any mission before. Small steps forward, followed by careful retreats whenever the creature showed the smallest sign of unease. Lucy joined the effort by the second day, coordinating logistics from the station, while Ethan continued documenting behavior that steadily built an undeniable case for the creature's capacity for trust and restraint. Drake, once he learned the full story, became an unexpected ally, using his authority to ensure the relocation received proper resources and protection from any further interference. The infant, examined by the station's medical team once the relocation was underway, was found to be remarkably healthy, despite months of exposure to the harsh conditions of the ruins, a testament to the careful, consistent care it had somehow received from a creature no one had ever imagined capable of such gentleness. Records eventually confirmed what Mara had suspected from the beginning, that the child belonged to one of the mining families lost during the chaos of the original attacks 3 years earlier, the sole survivor of a tragedy that had claimed everyone else in the household. With no surviving relatives found in the sector records, and after careful consideration of everything that had happened, Mara made a decision that surprised even herself, requesting formal guardianship of the child she had come to think of, quietly, as something like a small miracle born from an impossible chain of events. The station approved the request within weeks, and the child, whom Mara named Wren, after a small bird she remembered from stories her own mother used to tell, became a permanent part of life at Greywatch Station. The Voidfang, relocated successfully to its new protected territory, settled into a pattern of behavior that continued to defy every assumption written in the old threat files. Under an agreement negotiated carefully between Mara, Drake, and eventually Director Bracken himself, a small observation post was established at the edge of the new territory, staffed on rotation by scouts, trained in the careful, patient methods Mara had pioneered, during those first tense days in the ruins. Months passed, and the story of what had happened at Kell's Hollow spread slowly through the sector, changing the way people spoke about the creature that had once been nothing more than a name that inspired fear. The old reports were revised, the history rewritten to reflect the truth Mara and Ethan had uncovered in that dusty administration building. A truth that reminded everyone in the sector that even the most feared things sometimes carried stories more complicated than anyone had bothered to ask about. Mara visited the observation post regularly, often bringing Ren along as the child grew from infant to toddler, taking her first unsteady steps on ground not far from the canyon, where she had once slept safely against scales instead of skin. The Void Fang, though it kept its distance from most visitors to the post, always seemed to know when Mara and Ren arrived, appearing at the edge of its territory, to watch them with the same steady, considering eyes it had shown from their very first encounter. On one particular evening, nearly a year after everything began, Mara sat at the edge of the observation post with Ren asleep in her arms, watching the last light of day fade across the canyon, where a creature once thought to be nothing but a monster, now lived in quiet peace. The Void Fang approached slowly, closer than it had ever come to the post before, and settled itself nearby, close enough that Mara could hear the slow, steady rhythm of its breathing. For a long moment, neither of them moved, human and creature sharing the quiet stillness of the evening together, bound by a trust that had been built one careful step at a time, out of curiosity, out of compassion, and out of the simple willingness to look past fear long enough to see the truth underneath it. Ren stirred slightly in her sleep, one small hand curling against Mara's shoulder, and the Void Fang's head turned toward the sound, watching with the same gentle vigilance it had shown from the very beginning. Then, slowly, deliberately, it lowered itself further, resting its great scarred head close enough that Mara could reach out and touch it if she chose. She did, gently, her hand resting against scales that had once seemed impossibly dangerous, and now felt, somehow, like the safest thing she had ever known. The creature that had vanished from every record, hunted as the deadliest beast in the sector, had been found not as a monster at all, but as something far more remarkable, a survivor capable of loss, capable of grief, and capable, against every expectation, of love. And as the stars began to appear over the quiet canyon, Mara understood that the story people would tell about this creature from now on would never again begin with fear. It would begin instead with the image that had changed everything, a deadly beast, curled protectively against a small, sleeping heartbeat, choosing gentleness, in a world that had given it every reason to choose otherwise.